I'd like to begin video one, How Minds Grow, with a little presentation on a famous coach, legendary coach, Dean Smith. So this story is about Kenny Smith, one of his players, talking about Dean Smith. You may or may not have seen it, but I think it's a great lead in to this idea of how minds grow, and maybe implying that Dean Smith was as evolved as you could possibly be.
Some of the stories and memories you have, rest in peace, obviously one of the greatest to ever do it, Dean Smith.
My favorite story is not even with me. It's with Mactar Njai, who played at North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
He was from Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Played at Michigan, transferred in.
Went to Oak Hill.
And went to Oak Hill, yeah, he went to Oak Hill. So Mac was having a tough time in practice. So Roy Williams was assistant coach at the time, and Bill Guthridge. And so they're getting on Mac, like, Mac, what's wrong with you? Blah, blah, blah. Coach Smith never cussed, ever. Excuse me, ever. Never cussed. So they're getting on him, and so they throw him out of practice, right? So Coach Smith, after practice, goes to him, says, Mac, is everything all right? Like, homesick? Like, and he's like, no, coach, and he's not looking at him. He's like, Mac, look at me when I'm talking to you. Mm-hmm. He's like, no, coach, I'm just not feel. Mac, look at me as I talk to you. He said, coach, in my culture, to look an adult in the eye is
sign of disrespect.
It's a sign of disrespect. So Coach Smith says, oh, okay. Walks out. So next day in practice, there's no Coach Guthridge. We threw him out of practice. Coach Guthridge's not there for a week. So Mac said he gets a call from his mom. She's like, Mac, there's this man here in Africa. Says he's your coach, assistant coach. I know it's Coach Smith. I don't know him well. He's been here for a week saying he's learning our culture. He sent Coach Guthridge to learn his culture so he could never make that mistake again. That's is deep. What Coach Smith is.
That's deep.
What an amazing profession that we're engaging in, an opportunity to coach athletes. Obviously, stories like Dean Smith are uncommon because Dean Smith is uncommon, but every coach interacts with athletes, and athletes have parents. And what this video series is designed to do is to give us coaches perspective that maybe we haven't quite considered, just as Dean Smith in that story. And one of the things that I would like to do through this series is present some ideas that have been transferred to me through certain authors. And the author that I'm going to reference in this video is a guy by the name of David Brooks, How to Know a Person. And in this book, he talks about a 4-task model that hopefully I can present, and maybe you can reflect on as to how it would help benefit you and your program. Now, one of the things I absolutely think is true, and I heard a guy named Rich Ohrnberger, who was a former Penn State player, professional football player, he said the best coaches that he's ever seen are viciously introspective. And I think that's true. I think all great coaches, before they point fingers and assign blame, I think they're always thinking about how did they contribute to the mess that's in front of them. And that mess could take on many different realities, but they are viciously introspective, and they hold themselves extremely accountable. Because what we know is true is that our athletes and often our parents will blame us, and they will point fingers at us. And if we're not viciously introspective, and if we don't entertain other perspectives, what tends to happen is we create this self-fulfilling prophecy where, a person with a very immature perspective blames, and then you call them a blamer, which very well might be true, and then they take on that identity of a blamer, and we can't get out of this cycle. It's this never-ending cycle where we as coaches contribute to this cycle, and we know that once we get in this cycle, it's really hard to get out of. Okay, so David Brooks basically said there are 4 tasks that people engage in. He actually said there were 5, but I'd only like to present 4 of them from our model. And so many of our young athletes have what he would call the most primitive model, this imperial task, this person as a king, and it's his world, and everyone around him, quite honestly, doesn't have value. A king can impose his will on everyone, and many of our athletes, not many, that's probably an overstatement, but some of our athletes are so self-absorbed that they can't comprehend accepting a more limited role, certainly not being a bench player. And when this mindset goes home and blames a coach for playing favorites, oftentimes parents, this is the only perspective they have. So parents naturally accept that position as sacred and gospel, and then all of a sudden we're in this cycle, this downward cycle. So we want to always consider are our athletes in the imperial task. The second task that he represents is called the interpersonal task. This is actually a more evolved position from David Brooks's position. Now, what he argues, and I would say this is very common. He says that we engage in an interpersonal task, an us versus them reality. And when you think about the cliques that show up on your teams and the coalitions that are formed, oftentimes that's because our athletes take on an interpersonal task, and they become so loyal to their peers and their friends that they will defend them at all costs. And so if we as a coach get into this little interpersonal battle with a player, I'm just telling you that these task-driven realities, they will support that player to no end. And now all of a sudden, it's not coach versus player, it's coach versus multiple players. And that's something we want to try to avoid. And according to David Brooks, certainly these are 2 perspectives that you eventually want to grow out of. But our young athletes, and oftentimes our parents, and maybe even coaches, engage in an interpersonal perspective. Now, the third task model he talks about is a career task. And oftentimes this is where young coaches live. Young coaches take a job, they have a purpose, they want to build their program, they want to achieve great success, they want to achieve success that the community is going to be proud of, and he calls this the career task. And again, this is really common in young coaches. It's common in old coaches too. I mean, what's wrong with naturally wanting to build a program that people are proud of? And when you have this mindset, what tends to happen is you get a laser-like focus on becoming the best. And this is very common. You'll hear this stated time and time again, this laser-like focus. And this laser-like focus is on being the best. It's a purpose-driven mindset. Well, what I've come to realize is that, and he actually mentions this too, this idea of one of the greatest research studies they've ever done is something called the invisible gorilla, where when you're given a task, in this particular case, you can watch it, you were asked to count the number of passes made by the white t-shirts. And then a gorilla comes dancing in front, and people are oblivious to the gorilla. They miss it entirely. They miss it entirely because they were so focused on this task that this gorilla is truly invisible. And what's funny is comedians often recognize that this is true. And Dumb and Dumber, a classic example where Harry and Lloyd are confronted with these a bus full of women in bikinis, and they're so focused on getting to the next town that they lose sight of an incredible opportunity in front of them. And I believe they basically fell prey to this invisible gorilla, that they are so narrowly focused that they lost sight of an opportunity when it presented itself. Okay. And again, David Brooks calls that the career task. Okay. Now, the last task, and certainly the task that Dean Smith engaged in, is what's called a generative task. This is a task that expands time horizons incredibly. Success is not defined in terms of days, weeks, seasons even. Success is defined in terms of years and decades. And the idea is, and there's a quote that I love: "The secret to life is to plant trees in whose shade you'll never sit." And I suppose that is the mantra of the generative mindset. It's that we need to start seeing our athletes as people before athletes. And certainly that was Dean Smith. And here we're going to close up soon. But what I thought was amazing was when Dean Smith passed away, he sent a $200 check to all of his letter winners. And again, this speaks to his generative mindset, where he wanted each of his letter winners to go to dinner one last time on him so they could take their spouse to dinner. So this How Minds Grow first video is to challenge us. Again, coaches need to be viciously introspective. What we cannot do is we cannot change the perspectives of our athletes and our parents, and we can't do it overnight. The best we can do is to challenge ourselves to grow every day, every week, every month, every year, and then potentially over time, maybe we can have the same impact on lives that Dean Smith had. And I would think that would be an honorable, noble goal to aspire to. Okay, so never stop learning. Always challenge what it is you believe. Always challenge your perspective. What is it that you aren't seeing? And with respect to our task as a coach, I think it's a really great way to frame how people think, and to do it in a manner in which what is their task, what is their goal, what is their objective, and certainly the generative task, goal, objective might be the highest level, but the people that we interact with on a daily basis seldom entertain that position. And if we're viciously introspective, I think knowing the difference allows us to be better leaders.